I'm actually welcoming the virtual audience, because the virtual audience are actually ahead of the real audience. I don't know if that's a phenomenon that normally happens, but that's completely fine. So we've got the virtual audience, I'm hoping, at home. I hope the virtual audience have had as good as dinner as we have had. Maybe I shouldn't tell the virtual audience what we've had for dinner, because lunch, I mean. I can't, because that might make you jealous. Maybe you've had better lunches, who knows? Maybe if you're a virtual audience member and you want to tweet what you've had for lunch, please do that, and then you can impress us. What did we have? We had a rather nice, we had this sort of a metal thing which had lots of different layers, and we had, what do you call them? I've forgotten what this, scallops, of course. Skammuslinger, I think, in Danish, yeah, is that right? Yeah, we had scallops and we had tomatoes in a sort of, balsamic sauce, was that? I can't remember. I don't know, whatever. And then we had this sort of, what was the third thing? Come on, someone help me out here. A salad of quinoa. Quinoa, a word I can never say properly. So as people are slowly, I think it was the fact that there was cake and coffee that was the enticement downstairs, and there's probably some massive queue. So I am going to be filling massively while the audience hopefully can hear my dulcet tones trickling down the staircase, and they're going to sort of bring themselves back up, which is important. So I don't want to, I'm going to wait a little bit before I introduce our next session. I think while we are here, it's worth wondering, oh yes, something nice happened for me. Did you get to talk to people in lunch, by the way? Did anybody get to talk to someone that they've never spoken to before? Or did you just all sort of go into your tribes and just speak to people you already knew? Because I met a really nice guy called Jeppe. Is he here? Where's Jeppe? He's a gentleman. There he is. He's Yellow House or Red House? It's a Yellow House, isn't it? Yes, he's a gentleman that is making wine out of vegetables. And supposedly, is it your Parsnip Wine is the big favourite? Was that right? So if you're a big fan of Parsnip Wine, or if you've never been a fan of Parsnip Wine and you want to be a Parsnip Wine fan, then Jeppe is your man. I think that actually scanned. So I met him. Did any of you do the showcases? Did you do that? Yes? Was that interesting, weird, peculiar, bizarre, good? All of the above? I'll tell you this. I can see the door is shutting now, which is a sort of a message to me to stop wibbling on and to actually start bringing us back onto. Looks like we've all got everybody back. Right. So don't taste the chocolates, by the way, or the raspberries. Leave them alone because they're all part of the thing. But do enjoy your coffee and your cake. So here we go. You ready? I hope so. This morning, focus very much on the taste. How will sustainability agendas impact the taste of food and vice versa? And whilst I totally appreciate that we in some ways are desperately trying to create some frame for the 3 days, it's obvious that obviously all the different speakers are kind of sort of moving out of their realms and into the various different areas of the other parts of the agenda, but that's fine. Now we're going to take a step slightly back and look at the taster. How can individual taste preferences meet the demand for sustainability? I'm going to say that again because that was rubbish. How can individual taste preferences meet the demand for sustainability? In a sec, I'm going to hand over to Mariah Vogelzang, who's behind me. Now, you might recognize Mariah from all sorts of amazing work she does, but she also ran a very successful session at Creative Taste Buds back in 2017, so we're very happy to have her back, which is great. I hope you can see me. Now, she's a genius at transforming people, your people, so you're going to get transformed, particularly through her key area, passion, which is food. And she'll be joined by a couple of men who have actually both come to their senses. We'll be meeting the very lovely Bom Frøst, better known as Bom, who is a sensory scientist from the University of Copenhagen, whose efforts within the cross-section between gastronomy and sensory science is creating future generations of food scientists to make healthier food more tasty and satisfying. And alongside him is the equally lovely, who isn't here yet, but I think will be here soon, Professor Barry C. Smith. Do we call Barry C. Smith? Does he come up now, or does he come up later? I don't know. Do we see? It would be nice to see Barry. There's Barry. Can you hear us, Barry? Say something, Barry. Like, I can hear you, Paul. Please. Can you hear me, Barry? Can you hear me, Barry? Barry can't hear you. That's not good. Let's hope he can hear me at some point, and let's hope that somebody can fix that. A technician's looking at it. Someone's talking in my ear, so that means that they are looking at it. But I'll tell you about Barry.
Just about.
Hey, Barry, you can hear me. Can you hear me, Barry?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Very little.
Very little. A technician is looking at it. we're working on it. I don't know what the international sign for it is. We're working on it, but that is what we're doing. But Professor Barry C. Smith is director of the Institute of Philosophy at the University of London.
Just about.
I think that means he's just about hearing me, not just about the director of the Institute of Philosophy at the University of London. But he's put Aristotle in his place, and he's certainly transformed the way that I look at the inside of an aeroplane when I take off. I'm hoping he's going to be able to hear me in a sec. Can you hear me, Barry? I'm going to cross fingers, and I'm going to just shove it onto Mariah's plate. So let's give them a big round of applause, and let's get going.
Okay.
So we're going to do a session that's slightly different than the previous one. We're starting with us three presenting separately, but all on the same theme. And while we were speaking, we were thinking about our topic, about individual taste preferences in relation to sustainability. And we found a kind of common denominator, which was looking at desire. And that's really our kind of side focus, but could be also a main focus in the end. After the soapbox session, we will then continue with a interactive conversation. Also for you guys at home, but in the second part of the session, we really would like you to participate, giving some responses via Twitter. So if you don't have a Twitter account, then you can get one now. But we're starting with Bom.
Do you have the clicker?
No, I don't.
Me neither.
Oh, you need a clicker. Can I get a clicker from somewhere? Do we have a clicker I can throw at the stage?
So I'm going to get up and ask for a clicker first. So I'm taking the liberty of starting out, even though, let's see what happens here. It goes fine. There are some chocolate on your table, and if you have no objections, you can try it. There are two different types. You can eat them any way you want. Pay attention to them, don't pay attention to them. I'll return to them later. So we're going to talk about desire and our desire for deliciousness. Desire in many different domains, and one of the things is deliciousness. And some people have such a big desire for deliciousness that they cannot contain themselves, they cannot stop eating things that are not healthy for them. So as the image here suggests, we could eat ourselves to death if we only follow our desires for a sweet taste. But there should be other ways. We could also have a desire to live healthy, and we can do that in many different ways. We can abstain from earthly pleasures in an overdose, or we can find solutions that can, even though we do overexpose ourselves to earthly pleasures, then we can still, through various technologies, help, etc., live with our unsustainable behavior. So there are also other solutions to that. We can desire to live sustainably, and maybe that requires that we abstain from some pleasures, or that we turn down our desire for particular types of taste, as the case for the vegan gingerbread here, who is somewhat different than the other gingerbreads. So we have all of these things that we would like to do, and we would like to do to make the world a better place for us. So we have a desire for more than one type of pleasure at a time. And this is really a problem, because sometimes desire for more than one type of pleasure means that you need to do a trade-off between one or the other. Which one is most important for me now? Is it the earthly desires? Is it deliciousness that I want to have? Or is it my desire to live a healthy and sustainable life that makes it more important for me to choose something else than what my desire for my sweet tooth tells me that I should have? And I certainly have a problem with a sweet tooth. And I also have a problem with that if I don't tell myself to stop eating, I can, as long as there's food in front of me, I can continue eating to the point beyond where I'm fully satiated. And that is in the long run not a very good situation for me. So I need to balance my different types of desires. And if we think about it in a more scientific perspective, or then in a way, how do we do that every day? We can see, if we turn to design theory, we can look at how we interact with food at 3 different levels. We have our immediate perceptual level, or the sensory level, where that is what we experience immediately with our senses. And then we have the functional level, where what is it that the food does for us? What are the nutritional properties that we seek to get out of eating that food? And also that the food should be safe and not be, in the long term, detrimental to our health. But then there's also the reflective level, where we have the knowledge of how is this food made? What's the idea behind? What's the philosophy of the production system? Or what are the ethical aspects of the production system and the sustainability of the production system? And this becomes much more necessary to have now that we are in the Anthropocene. So we have the interaction of the 3 tiers, and we need to figure out how can we, as people who are producing food and eating food, balance and interact balance the interaction between all of these 3 different levels. And if we have a food that speaks to us at all 3 levels, we like the way it's made, we like that it's healthy for us, and we like that it tastes good at the same time, then we have a really powerful persuaser in trying to live within our desires, but at the same time paying attention to some of the other aspects. So we know that we are under pressure, and it became quite evident during the lockdown that people decided to cook more. They started cooking more because some of the pressure from time was relieved from them. And this is a pan, or not a completely pan, but from 16 different countries in the European Union, and also in some countries outside. We discovered that the majority of people increased their home cooking during the lockdown, and the majority of people increased their healthiness of the food that they were eating, measured as that they had a more bigger adherence to the Mediterranean diet, irrespective of countries. And we know that we can, by learning, so if we have more time, we can cook more sustainably, or we can live a more healthy and sustainable life. And we have more knowledge, then we can also eat and cook more sustainably. And we figured this out in a little study with some 670 children who was experiencing a cooking training program in the elementary school, 5th grade. And during that, they learned to appreciate fish, or at least some of them said, well, I'm more interested in trying fish than I was before. And there are also some people who were put off by the animalness of the fish. So it's sort of there's an opportunity for accepting more, but there's also an opportunity for rejecting food when you are in the situation of learning. And then comes the pride you have in the food you eat, and the joy you get from eating food that you know about. And we examined that in a study with Indonesians, where they were having their local food tempe, which is a fermented bean product. And the difference here is that some of them were locally produced, and some of them were internationally obtained or imported, and some of them were from small producers, some from large, some were from traditional methods, and some were more modernized methods. And we had 2 different sessions. First, we served the food for them. They rated how much they liked it. They came back 1 week later. They got the same food again. Now we told them what the different items were, and then they rated them again. And what we could see is that, well, if we have the traditional food, when you know it's the traditional food, your pride in eating that goes up quite a lot. And your joy from eating it, the hedonic rating you give for the food, also goes up quite a lot. So the knowledge of that this food is local, and that it corresponds with my food traditions, the food culture that I'm in, makes the food more pleasurable. However, these were millennials, and we can already see that some of the millennials are forgetting their local traditional food, because they also appreciate the modernized versions of the tempe more when they knew about that. They have forgotten about what the taste of the traditional tempe is. So we have a desire for knowledge. We appreciate things more when we know more about them, but it can also backfire. So the chocolate that I offered you, there's a lot of knowledge in that, in making it, but there's also the knowledge of that this comes from a sustainable, a fair trade, direct trade scheme, so that the chocolate maker here in Denmark, he's buying directly from the cocoa makers and not through the international trade. Also that it's been awarded with a lot of different awards, chocolate awards, the different types, and we know where it's from, and we know that I know that it's made locally from where I live. It's like 30 kilometers away, that they transform the beans into some of the best chocolate in the world. So all of this knowledge plays into my desire to go for it. But I also have to accept that I really need to pay the true cost for that food, because that chocolate is a lot more expensive than the run-of-the-mill chocolate that there is out there. So that's the trade-off again between our desire for economic sustainability versus the desire for a global sustainability. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
For my first 10 minutes.
Hello, Barry. Can you hear me?
Hi there.
Hey, good to see you.
So fine.
Good to see you.
Thank you for being here. Would you mind to share your story, please?
I would. I need someone to put up the slides and to move them for me. So while that's happening, those are not my slides, but I'm delighted to be taking part in this session. But very sad not to be there with you. I was planning to arrive because, according to the UK, Denmark is on the amber list, but very wisely, the Danes have put the UK on a red list, so we have to stay where we are. It's very understandable. So I'm just waiting for my slides, if I could have those, please. I'm going to continue discussing the issues that Michael had in his 3 levels, and I'm going to look at the immediate perceptual experience of food and flavor, if slides appear. If not, I will just have to keep talking about this. Nope.
They're working on it, Barry. I know you can hear me. All right, they're working on it.
They're working on it, Barry.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me anticipate the first couple of slides so that I can explain that.
Here we go. They're going to flip through mine and then yours will be there.
Okay,
there
stop there. No. You had one, but it's gone. Okay.
There you go.
Good. We're there. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please.
Now we just need them on the big screen too.
It would be very ironic if our individual taste preferences aligned with the demands of sustainability, if we actually desired to have locally sourced, sustainably farmed and fished, nutritious food, but we mostly don't. So we know we're driven by our taste preferences, and it's flavor first. It's how the food tastes. Next, please. So what makes food desirable? Next, please. It's usually how they taste. Next, please. But when we ask what it is to taste the flavors in our food, we have to realize there's a hidden complexity to tasting. So what we call tasting is a way in which we are taking in simultaneously inputs from touch, taste, and smell, maybe even sound. We are led by visual clues and even the temperature and sometimes the vibration of food in our mouths. And all of this is synthesized by the brain into an integrated and uniform experience of flavor. Next slide, please. So most of what we taste, we know, is due to smell. Next slide, please. And that smell coming from 2 sources, as Paul Rosen told us, either odor molecules going from the nose to the receptors or going from the mouth through the nasopharynx to the receptors. Next slide, please. Touch and texture make a difference to food acceptability, how crunchy or chewy or sticky or slippery the food is. Next slide, please. And of course, the trigeminal nerve, which is the 5th cranial nerve that serves the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and that's the one that tingles when you have wasabi and you feel it at the bridge of the nose. And it also leads to sensations of cooling as well as burning with spices. Next slide, please. We know that sound is also part of one of the drivers of food acceptability. How crunchy is an apple? How crisp are those potato chips? Next slide, please. But there are also extrinsic factors. There are external cues such as how food looks. Next slide, please. We wouldn't necessarily expect to have a great experience from this plate, although we may. Next slide, please. So, what is it that we could talk about that involves not just liking? If we're going to get beyond liking, we might ask what adds interest to the flavors of food? What makes them surprising or intriguing or tempting? And is there such a thing as creating an emotional connection to the food that might drive our taste preferences and not just the immediate sensations in the mouth, in the nose? Well, of course, we know that we can moderate our taste preferences by our ethical beliefs. This is why vegans don't eat animal products and vegetarians avoid meat. And of course, most of us would choose, if we knew, not to eat chocolate that involved the use of child slave labor. However, the temptations remain. Vegans often tell me they miss cheese, and vegetarians often tell me they would love to have a bacon sandwich. Next slide, please. So, enter the Impossible Burger. Now, this might seem to be the way in which we tempt people who are not really very convinced that they should eat purely plant-based meats to still have an experience that's like the one they desire. Next slide, please. But of course, the Impossible Burger uses chemical compounds to mimic the aroma, flavor, and texture of meat. And discovering which components drive which sensory experiences is part of what the food industry does. So look at this descriptions. The ingredients include wheat protein to give the burger firmness and chew, potato protein, which allows the burger to hold water and its transition from a softer state to a more solid state during cooking. For fat, Impossible Foods use coconut with the flavor sucked out. And then, of course, you need leg hemoglobin for heme, which gives you the flavor of meat. Now, heme is usually in animal products. It's a precursor of hemoglobin and it's a protein. But here, we have it manufactured in a lab with a genetically modified yeast. Now, that's maybe going to lead to a tension between different ethical views that people have. They don't want to eat highly processed food. Many Greens are against the idea of laboratory genetically modified foods. But then we could also say our ideals don't always align so neatly as many suppose they should. We want to eat delicious plant-based food, but here we're having a highly crafted, highly engineered product. Now, environmentally, we can at least say that because the heme is derived in the lab from this soy leg hemoglobin, it's not making a lot of land use in the way we would if we were growing a huge amount of soy to produce heme. So there are things to weigh in the balance here. Next slide, please. But the trouble is that many of our taste preferences are more aligned to what the food industry would like us to have or demands that we have. And the problem is that the shaping of these individual taste preferences is not a simple matter, and the drivers are really quite sophisticated. Next slide, please. Now, it has to be admitted that we live in different taste worlds. How bitter you find the broccoli, or how sugary or how salty you find your food may depend on how many taste buds or papillae you have on your tongue. But it also means that we live in different taste worlds because of what's available or affordable or what's desirable. We have to bear that in mind. Next slide, please. But now we turn to the way the food industry is gunning for an awful lot of us, certainly in the industrialized developed countries. So we know that ultra-processed food is intended to increase shelf life and also to modify and enhance sensory qualities that we might respond to. So we have colors, flavors, sweeteners, preservatives, stabilizers, emulsifiers. All these additives are to make the food not just palatable, but hyper-palatable. And additives like these disguise the undesirable sensory properties that some of these processes involve, but they also give the final product more desired sensory properties. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. That's it. So, I mean, look at what's here. Maltodextrin, synthesized carbohydrate. We've got all sorts of milk products in there. This is a packet of snacks, potato chips, really. And the problem is that it's using some of the responses we naturally normally have to whole foods or natural foods to get us to eat more UPF. Next slide, please. So as Uli Moritzen told us so nicely and has reminded us in many of his research publications and books, some of the things we find most delicious is where we have two types of umami combined. Glutamates on the one side and nucleotides on the other. And when we combine them, we get synergistic umami, a huge hit due to an allosteric reaction on the umami receptor. And this is what allows us to have favorite combinations like ham and cheese, bacon and eggs, pea and scallop, tomato and anchovies. Now, next slide, please. Look at what we see in the UPF food snack. Well, we've got monosodium glutamate, that's the salt of glutamic acid, that's the glutamate side, and then we have inosinate and guanylate, two of the nucleotides in a disodium version. So putting these together, you will get a synergistic umami flavor hit. But of course, that signal will not portend the arrival of nutrients and proteins that the brain is expecting from those signals if they had them in natural foods. Next slide, please. Also, UPF is very bad for the environment because the idea is to extract single ingredients from raw foods. A lot of processing and a lot of crop production to produce the single ingredient you want, which you then recombine with the others to give you the delicious and seemingly unavoidable tastes. Next slide, please. And it's not just that we might like these, it is something much more dangerous for us. And the insights to this are due to this man, Kent Berridge, who introduces the important distinction between wanting and liking. We often use these interchangeably, but they're not interchangeable. Wanting usually leads us to liking, but what a lot of the UPF foods do is they stimulate wanting even beyond the point where we are not liking very much and not even enjoying when we have these. People used to think dopamine was the pleasure chemical, but it's not. It's a neurotransmitter that predicts the things that will give us reward. So it attaches to the cues and the drivers for food choice rather than to the satisfaction. So unfortunately, a lot of these products drive up dopamine for the cues, but they don't encourage us to really like them. So what we have is a wanting we can't turn off for foods we don't even like that much. Next slide, please. And that's the problem with a lot of people who are obese in Western countries. They're overfed and undernourished. They may go on seeking those foods to try to realize what the signal tells them will be in that food, even though it isn't there. And that's not sustainable either environmentally or in terms of personal health. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. I would like to just finalize this story with some examples of the work that I've been doing as a designer working with food. So I come from a very different background. And when the slides are here, I can share some with you, because what was also clear and evident in the first session is that eventually we're all just craving human beings. And I think that's very interesting, but that's also very complicated because we just live in this world full of abundance, like we have access to everything. So how can you stimulate people to really feel the true value of food? Because when you just have access to everything, funnily enough, you would think you would be very grateful. But it seems that the more access we have, the less grateful we become. We just normalize everything and we just take everything for granted, really. So I know that in Denmark, the tap water is of really good quality. And I'm from the Netherlands, and we also have really good quality tap water, which is quite amazing. Like it's for me, it feels like a true miracle that I can be in my home, that I can open the tap, and that there's real, pure, drinkable tap water coming from that tap. And if you really think about it, how magical that really is, then I actually think we should have a shrine next to our sink. Like there's the dishes, and then here we are sitting praying for that tap water, because it is really quite amazing. But funnily enough, most Dutch people, they actually do not drink tap water. They buy bottled water in plastic bottles. And some of the sources in the Netherlands for tap water are actually the same ones as for bottled water. So these people, they could have it from their tap, but they rather go to the shop, buy it in plastic, and then drink it. And we also wash our clothes with it, and we flush our toilets with it, wash our cars with it. And the government is pushing people to pay more attention to not wasting water. But if you tell people to be more sustainable, using water, not to waste it, then, you know, people will have a little bit of a shorter shower, but they will forget about it because they don't really desire to be more appreciative of water. And I was thinking, isn't it interesting that when it comes to wine, for example, then we can have a lot of appreciation. We talk about wine, we want to pay a lot of money for wine, and we always talk about the terroir of the wine, like where the wine comes from, and the real connoisseur could potentially, I hope, really taste in the wine what the minerals of the soil were, where the plant was growing, where the vine was growing. But if you transfer that to tap water, it's quite similar actually, because tap water also has a terroir. It comes from different places. Sometimes it comes from the soil, sometimes it's filtered water. There are very different kind of sources for tap water. So I was imagining, what if we would have a tap water tasting in the Netherlands? We have 12 provinces. So what if you would get all the tap waters from these provinces together in one place and could have a tasting just as if you would have a wine tasting? And then when you put them together, only then you really realize how different these flavors are. And that very subtly, they are distinctively different, because some have different minerals, some have a different pH level. And the moment you stop talking about not wasting water because it's not sustainable, but you start to make people sensitive for the actual flavor of water and make them kind of step into this world that they have been engaging with on a daily basis, but no one really pointed it out to them that it is quite magical, and that the flavor of water is really different from place to place, and that you could have a water tasting and say, well, tonight we're eating fish, so we should go to Rotterdam to get Rotterdam water with that. But if you want to have a good tap water pairing with your meats, then maybe you should go to Amsterdam, for example, because that's a better constitution for a meat pairing, for example. So this is not really designing something completely different, but what I'm really trying to do is to design a different mindset, because it's essentially we as eating human beings, we are behaving because we have certain habits, we are behaving because we don't really think about things, we do things because we see how things go and then we just copy what we have been learning. But what I really want to do is to find ways to make people really aware of what they already have within them. And I believe that we don't necessarily need to really design new things or make new products, but to actually design something in the brain of the eating human being. And the cool thing about human beings is they're not just eating, operating beings, but they have a mind full of imagination. And I know already Bom and Barry both have been talking about that, and also this morning in the session, we are very much aware that when you eat, you have a sensorial perception, but a large part of that is also happening in your brain. And that's very irrational. And the cool thing is that we as human beings, we really believe in fairy tales. There are so many things that we operate on a daily basis, which is really just an imagined thing, like money, for example, or the stock exchange. It's not really real, but we have the capacity as human beings to really believe in these kind of things. We are very sensitive to stories. So what you see here is a food massage salon. It is an installation for the photography museum, initially the one in Berlin. And they had this amazing exhibition about food photography, and I thought it's interesting that, you know, you have this food topic in photography, but the only thing you do is to look at it, and that's it. And that's what we do a lot. Like, we look at food a lot, but to really experience food, we do that like 3 times a day, but do we really do that? Do we really take our tongue as serious as we take our eyes seriously? So this is a food massage salon. So we have these large hammocks, and people get invited to get into one of those hammocks, and they are really large. So you're really enveloped, and you only have one hole, and that hole is for this part of your face. You get blindfolded, and you get your personal therapist who is joining you in this session. And your therapist has headphones on, and you have them as well. And both of you are listening to the same story. And the story you're hearing is not so unfamiliar, because actually it is the voice of your own tongue. Your own tongue is speaking to you. And honestly, your own tongue, it's a little bit pissed off, because you have just been looking at screens and always putting your eyes first before really becoming aware of your tongue. So your tongue wants you to just take a moment to really experience it. And so this food massage salon starts with like a massage of the whole body through the fabric of these hammocks, but essentially ends up on your face, because it's a salon, so you get a treatment. But when you are getting into this story, and because it's just 20 minutes, and I really want people to kind of surrender to this experience. So when you get into this story and really listen to what your tongue has to say, then you're also open to experiencing very small food experiences. So it's just 9 little food items. For example, you get a treatment of yogurt around the mouth, so on the cheeks as well. But then it goes inside of the mouth as well. So the border of inside and outside is shifting. But you also get a little brush of rum on your tongue, which is kind of unexpected if you're blindfolded. But you also get tahini. This is the sesame paste, which is quite sticky. But you get it here. You know, we all have this part in our mouth, but you never really put food there. It's kind of a secret part in your mouth that if you do put food there, then you get really aware of how funny it is to really have that there. You get a treatment with a marshmallow and a food memory experience, some lip scrub of sugar, and some apple cubes of really crispy apples, and then in your headphones you hear a beat, so you start to chew the apples on the beat, and then you have this tiny inner concert. So everything is really small, but after a while you really become aware, and your tongue also makes you aware of how precious it is to experience the world through your tongue. Because as a child, this was the first sense that you were using to experience your world. Maybe, I mean, I really know what this kind of velvet fabric on a couch tastes like, because as a child, apparently, I guess I have been licking that, or the curled telephone wire, depending on your age, having that in your mouth, or having sand in your mouth, or when you were kissing someone for the first time, your tongue was there with you. Your tongue really likes it when you speak a different language and you don't really know how to do it yet, and you have to twist your tongue. Those kind of adventures, that's what your tongue wants to have with you. And so these are some of the tools that we made to create this experience. Oops, oh, now I'm going suddenly really fast. So essentially, this experience was made for your tongue to tell you, take me with you on the adventure and have the adventures together. And all of this, it's not new. We have hammocks, we have tongues, we have food to experience. The only thing I try to do is to put that together in a different way. So the last thing I want to share with you very quickly is a project, my most recent project, which is very much about food, but it's without food because it's a project about hunger. And as human beings, especially I think in this time of age, we are not so used to have hunger anymore. Whereas being hungry in the sense of a short period of hunger or famine, if it's not lasting too long, it's actually really good for your body. Because when you're experiencing a fasting period, for example, then your body will start to clean neglected cells or damaged cells. So eventually you're kind of healing your own body. But also having the experience of fasting, it is making your all your senses heightened. It's really sensitizing yourself to smell, to flavor, to taste. And it is also doing something to you mentally, because you suddenly start to appreciate everything that's already around. And you start to also get into a different relationship with your body, because your body will tell you, hey, give me food. But then you say, okay, I can just wait and see what happens then. So you're really renewing the relationship you have with your body. But most people see fasting or hunger as something negative, which makes a lot of sense, because obviously it can kill you. But isn't that interesting that being hungry is actually very similar to food? Hunger is the lack of food. A little bit of it can heal you, but too much of it will kill you. But that's the same with food. A little bit of food will heal you, but too much of food can kill you just as well. So I made an installation about hunger. It's the Hunger Appreciation Station. It's for a Swiss museum. They have a whole exhibition about hunger. And for that, I started to do fasting myself. This time it was 5 days of fasting. And while I was fasting, hunger was in my belly, and I asked, can you come out? And so hunger was coming out, and then it came out of my mouth, and then it was sitting on my hand, and I was looking at it, and it was looking back at me. And I realized that hunger in itself, you know, it was a little bit scared of me. It was scared to scare me because it is so potent. But it can also be helping you. So we have this kind of conflicting relationship with hunger. And while it was sitting on my hand, I was listening to what it had to tell me, to what it can do to me, positively and negatively. And then I took hunger and I put it into a ceramic mouthpiece. So it's inside one of those mouthpieces. And when you go to the museum, you get one. And when you get one, you can see that it has a little plug, and you can plug it in. These are just some tests I did at home. You can plug it into a MP3 player, and when you bite it, it has a bone conductor on the inside. When you bite it, you can hear the voice of hunger speaking to you. So you do have something in your mouth. It's not edible, but you close your eyes and you listen to the story of hunger inside your mouth, because the bone conductor will make sure that you don't hear it on the outside of your ears, but you hear it on the inside of your head. Just like retronasal perception when you eat something, it's also on the inside of your head. So that's just the last thing I wanted to share with you. You can see it in Zurich. And while we're just watching the video, it's not really like it's just a background thing. I know we're running out of time, so I know that you just had some lovely chocolate and a cake, but I also want you to have a look at these raspberries that you have in front of you. And please do not eat them yet. So these are the raspberries. We have them here for you, and you can just pick them up if you want. And I would like you to really have a look at them, and you can take them in your hand, and you can see that they have all these different little balls. They're composed in a really beautiful way, and they're a little bit hairy. You know why they have these little hairs? These are antennas. They use them to pick up on whatever you're telling them. So this is how they sense you. And I would like you to also see if yours are as translucent as mine, which is quite amazing, because on the inside you can also see the inside of all these little balls. And I would like you to smell them and close your eyes while you do that. And if you smell them in the tray, then you might also smell the wood smell of the little tray, but you can smell them separately. And while you're smelling them, and you can just keep your eyes closed for a bit, I would like you to take a moment to see if you remember the last time you ate raspberries. I think most people have positive memories with raspberries, but maybe yours is different. And I don't know if you did that, but I'm sure you did, because I know you're all really playful people. But just take a raspberry, put it on your finger, and take another one and put it on your other finger. Did you do that when you were a kid? I think most of us did. So now you have like two little ones, right? And you can make them say hello to each other. You can introduce them to each other. So, hello. You can do it out loud. We're all kids here. Hello. I will say hello to you.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. And I also want you to introduce yourself to them, because you also have to tell them. And I will just do it for you. Hi. I'm Marije. I'm sorry, I am going to eat you. So just do that. And thank you for growing for me.
Thank you for growing.
Just go ahead. Don't be shy. We all do this, and nothing bad happens. And so now I really want you to close your eyes, and I'm going to guide you through it. So you have these on your fingers. Also at home, I hope you do. And you can maybe make a little selfie before you eat them to when they introduce each other, and post them on Twitter or in the chat. So close your eyes. And either one of them, I want you to put them against your lips, really softly. And you can feel that your lips are incredibly sensitive. You can feel even one hair, you can feel that on your lips. Your fingers are not as sensitive as your lips. So you are feeling these hairs, but you're also feeling all these little balls. You can use your tongue with it as well. And it's not so smooth, right? It has a little furry side. And so you can use your tongue and your lips to just explore the shape of this amazing berry that is on your finger. And maybe already you taste it a little bit, but try to keep it whole. And when you do that, I want you to very carefully put the raspberry in your mouth, but keep it whole still. And now I want you to use your tongue and try to, still keeping it whole, separate all these little balls. Separate the balls, trying to keep them whole. I know it's not easy, but see if you can really make single balls and even count a few. And you know these balls are just little babies. Now you have a mouthful of little bare babies. And these babies, they're really excited to be in your mouth. They've never been here before. So I want you to take them on a little tour through your mouth. So try to keep them together and take them on a little roller coaster tour. You could be a slow one, just around your teeth, in the back of your mouth, in the front, between your lips and your teeth. Can you manage that? And once you did that, now it's the moment. You are going to bite them now. And when you do that, they will cry. And their tears, you can taste them. That's the juice. But they were made to be eaten. That's the whole purpose of raspberries. So it's tears of joy. And now you taste them, you can also feel the release of the smell in your mouth. And you can swallow it. And isn't it funny? I hope someone can explain to me why. I know why, but isn't it funny that once you swallow something, then you don't feel it anymore? I mean, you don't taste it because there's no taste buds there, but also there's no sense that all of this ever happened. But now we filmed it, so we know. So that's it for now. Thank you. We're going to go to the soapbox session. Right, Paul?
We are indeed. I'm here. Look at me. I'm
all right. You're there.
Give a big round of applause. Give all three of them a round of applause. Crazy. I don't know. Right. Okay. So where are we? We are basically, as we did this morning, we're going to separate you guys out. Virtual lot, you're going to go off to have a virtual interview with this gentleman here. He's going to be strapped to the gurney, I think the expression is. But the rest of you are going to go back down. You are going to be treated to an experience with Jonathan Lear. Jonathan Lear is an associate professor at Absalon University College, and he's been doing some really interesting work with between food and gender, as amongst other things. So I encourage you to go downstairs, and we are running horribly over, but we do still need to try and get back here on time. So it would be great if we can try and attempt to be back here at 15:50. Good luck. So off you go. Don't get too wet, and we'll see you back here at 15:50 for the second half of the session. Thank you very much.
Ikke klar. Jeg skal lige have den på først. Er jeg live? Thank you very much for staying here. Now we are going to the online dialogue. So please continue to dialogue on showcases, the tab on your left-hand side, and Michael Bom Frøst will be here with me shortly. See you. Hello.
we've just been talking about you, virtual audience, with us physical lot here. We are all now back together as one. Feel quite holy. We've just done our Soapbox dialogues. We've just had a lovely virtual interview with Bom here, and we are going to then kick off for the next session. So without further ado, let's get back on to the second part. You could give a round of applause if you like.
Do we have Barry around here? Barry. So what we have planned to do is I made... hello, Barry. Nice to see you.
Hi there.
Is the taste bud tasting good for you? I don't know if you can see that. So thank you for being back. So what we prepared and planned is that I made quite a lot of illustrations because I wanted this session to be a conversation between the three of us and mostly you two. And I thought, I can ask questions, but what I always believe is that these two professionals are full of knowledge and fascinating insight. So I wanted to trigger, hopefully, some inspiration to flow in between us by showing them lots of illustrations, and I'll just run through lots of them. And I just randomly would like to share these illustrations, and also if you would like to, if you see them, I would like to ask you to respond to them. You can do that on Twitter so we can see, what you see when you see this, because I am very aware that when you see this, then someone will say it's about smelling, but someone else will say it's about like a graveyard in the brain. So, everybody has a different mind, and that's what I would like to kind of explore here. So if you see the images, then you can just respond. I would love to read them out loud, but I don't see any text here. But we can see them on our own devices or later on. So we can all join in this session, also if you're at home. So I would just like to just see where we end up, like showing you these illustrations and then asking you to respond within the theme of individual taste preferences and sustainability linked to desire. So Barry, if you see this illustration, this one, can you see it?
Yeah.
Is there anything that comes to mind that you would like to respond to? Considering this topic.
I like the one before.
Oh, let's go back. Yeah.
I like that one too.
That one raises something more kind of immediate for me. So there's both the fact that your anticipation of food is just as important as the reward you get when you eat it. So there are two kinds of pleasure. There's the pleasure of anticipation and the pleasure of reward. And here you've got the pleasure of anticipation. And of course, there can be different relations. You can smell something that smells terrible, like a Epoisse cheese that's ripe, and yet when you put it in your mouth, it's delicious. Or you can smell coffee, ground coffee, which smells wonderful, but when you put it in your mouth, you're a little disappointed because it doesn't quite match the beauty of the aroma. Or, in the case of chocolate aroma, you smell it, you get the reward, and they match, you get an extra hit. So this to me reminds me of the gap between retronasal olfaction and orthonasal olfaction, and the two kinds of pleasure.
Bom, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, when I saw it, I thought immediately of a type of sensory methodology we can use with consumers. It's called check all that apply, and it means that you either check or you put a cross on a response that you see it. So it's a way of making it easy for laymen to contribute to describing how food tastes, because there's a very big difference between verbalizing everything yourself and selecting from a list. And when I see this, I think what's in the brain is the list that we're presented to of what we can check off that was present in the food. And it's a very powerful way, or it's very empowering to see this list, because you have to recognize the word recognize that smell instead of coming up with it yourself. So it's a powerful aid for children, for people who are unfamiliar with tasting, to make it to describe food and to use that in the
Would that be also helpful if we would use those kind of lists in for regular consumers? Would that help them to make more sustainable choices?
Good question. I don't think that's it, not if it's like, but let's say, I think in order to do sustainable food choices, or to continuously have a sustainable food behavior as an eater, taster, then you have to maybe make a few good rules for what you will accept and what you will not accept. So if you can check off on the list that everything is met for your few sustainable rules, then you have a heuristic for saying, this is the kind of behavior that I desire to have from a virtuous point of view, that is good for the planet, that is good for my own behavior, etc. And I'm sure we will all fall in every once in a while, not behaving completely according to it, but if you have this list, it helps you pay attention to what it is. So I wouldn't say that describing the food in itself, but to create rules for yourself. I mean, I made a rule, and I can say in my own personal lab experience, you know, if you consider which foods do have the most pesticide residues, which kind of agriculture are using the most type of pesticides, etc. Viticulture. So if you're eating grapes that are not organically produced, there's a very big risk that you're consuming pesticides. If you want to avoid consuming pesticides, if you want to avoid having pesticides in the soil, in the water, you have to choose organic wine, because it's actually on the top 5 of different types of risks for how you consume pesticides as a consumer in the EU. So on top of my wine choice list is organic. If it's organic, I will buy it. If it's not organic, I will not buy it. That's a very short heuristic rule for me.
And you have a lot of food knowledge, but for people who do not have that knowledge, it could have been interesting to have a list like that, but then as on your device, so that you don't have to kind of know everything to know if you're making these choices according to
and I
your
know
values.
there are companies that are developing that. There's a Danish company called Each Thing that are trying to connect consumers so that you can sign up for free as a consumer. Companies have to pay for the service of having examined all their products, and then you can sort of check off what do you want to have as a consumer. I want to only have vegetarian food. I want to have food that's within the EU. So you have a barcode, you can scan it, and it will tell you this doesn't contain products from outside the EU. It should tell on the label anyway.
Please jump in, Barry.
I want to be a little less sanguine than Bom here, because it depends on what those descriptions are.
Yeah.
So if you have this classic kata, check all that apply, you've got to have some listings there that really resonate with what people think they're experiencing. But of course, the descriptions can lead as well as just reveal. They can also mislead.
Yeah.
So we know that food descriptions are quite important. When the chef Heston Blumenthal made crab ice cream, people didn't like it. But when he renamed it frozen crab bisque, people thought it was delicious.
Yeah.
So the way we think about our food, the way we describe it matters. And the same odors that we find in Parmesan cheese, butyric acid, valeric acid, are the odors we find in vomit. And so the hedonics change depending on the descriptions we give. So that's part of it. Also, I think kata, just having a list of descriptions, is too static. Tasting is a little temporal sequence where one thing happens, then another, then another. And if you can have descriptions that match what's happening where, and you can see how the sequence works from sweet at first to a little more savory, or to bitter at the finish, or bitter at the middle and sweeter at the end, you can see which sequences people actually like. And then ideally you would want to say, well, the foods that you like are the ones that seem to go sweet, salty, sweet, or sweet, bitter, salty, and then you discover what your palate actually is. So I think there's room for lots of creation here.
Great. Let's go to the next. So I don't know if you don't see any. I don't know if you can see it. If you don't see any anything that triggers something in you, then we can go just to the next.
I think this one is very much you. I mean, you describe yourself as an eating designer, and last time you performed at Creative Taste, but you said I'm designing shit, because, and I think if with some creative interpretation, this is what is going. It's coming in on one side and out on the other side as something different, and it's all matter. And I like this is what we eventually do with the food we consume. But I think most of the sensorial pleasure we get from food comes from the very short time it spends in the mouth, and that pathway of destruction that it goes through as we are chewing a crisp or an apple or some other things. That very incredibly fast transformation by 5 to 10 chews, forming a bolus and swallowing it. That dynamic, as you say, Barry, it's important that we have the dynamics into it. That's actually where we get the appreciation or the instant gratification from the food.
I think we also, in the case of wine, have the persistence or the aftertaste, the length of the wine. And there's some winemakers who are on a personal quest to see if they can have a 15-second duration of some developing flavors that happen once you've swallowed. And of course, that's when odors coming from the throat up to the nose are giving you what we mislabel an aftertaste. And we also know that those flavors are produced by an interaction between the molecules in the throat and our own biology, the bacteria in us. So it may be a really rather personal experience.
All right, let's go.
I think the longest wine aftertaste I've ever had was probably several hours, but it was a fortified wine. It was made in relation to the 250th anniversary of the artist Goya, the Spanish artist, and I was presented with this, and it had a very strong astringency and walnut, and it just lasted for. I could still taste it when I was bicycling home after the wine tasting. It was the last wine in the tasting. It was at least an hour. I'm sure that's That's the record for me.
That's a long tasting memory. I also judge extraordinary wines. You'll only have a few in a lifetime, but an extraordinary wine is one which gives me flashback memories or recall of it when unexpected. I can be sitting on a bus in London and suddenly I get this rush of reconstructing the wonderful taste of this extraordinary wine, and then I concentrate on it and it subsides. And I tend to think that's because the quality of the wine has stamped itself into my mind.
And could we use these kind of experiences, like you're both describing, could we also use that on other products? And could that help people to not crave something else instantly after they already had a meal, to make it more sustainable? Would that be a possibility?
I think it is.
Sure.
I listened to the psychology professor Eb Köster, and he's a Dutch professor of olfaction, etc. And he did a lot of different work, and some of the work he did was on anosmics, those who are not capable of smelling anymore. And there's a big difference between if you can in a very vivid way recall the memory of the smell of the food you're eating, then you can have a pleasurable life. If you cannot recall the memory of the food you had before, like the smell of coffee when you are drinking coffee, then you have a much higher likelihood of sinking into depression because you know you're missing a lot. So I think if we're going to use that to a lot of different foods to make us more sustainable, would be to spend more time on the sensation we get from it. And I think what you showed us with the raspberry tasting was amazing. I've never eaten a raspberry like that before. And it's not because of the raspberry, it's because of the process that you took us through, the guided tasting of that. I've done it with a raisin as a mindfulness exercise once, but I should have done it with raspberries. They're much better than raisins.
Yeah, raisins or mindfulness experiences with raisins are too serious, in my opinion.
Raspberries are more playful.
I agree. But I was going to say, we've been doing a lot of work with people suffering from post-COVID anosmia and parosmia. So I'm hearing a lot from patients about this. But one of the things that seems to make a difference along the lines Bom suggests is whether people, before they lost their sense of smell, had the ability to imagine food aromas or flavors. And not everybody does. Mm-hmm. So it's a good question for the audience now, whether you could just try this yourself. I mean, can you voluntarily summon up the experience of smelling frying onions or drying paint or cut grass as easily as you can maybe imagine the street you live in or imagine the face of a loved one? Now, not everybody can, but I don't think it's just a genetic difference. I think it's about training. And I think if we were to, and artists maybe help us to do this, to develop this imagining of what we're not actually having, this will really fix in the mind the experiences that we have, both in memory after having them and when they're lost in illness or older age.
Yeah, when I had COVID, I lost my sense of smell, and I was sitting in the living room, and then suddenly I was smelling fried potatoes, and I went to the kitchen, but they weren't there at all. That was so awkward to just have your brain like in a kind of flash of confusion, because nothing was really entering my nose. Would you like to go to the next image?
Yes.
That's lovely.
And you can respond to it also at home if you like, through Twitter. Like, what do you see in the image? But now I'm not seeing things that I think are in any way responding to the image. So
Mariah, I like this image a lot because what it connects is the fact that you could both be thinking rather prosaically about empty stomach and hunger, but it connects beautifully the emotionality of food, the fact that we can feel an emptiness, or we can be feeding ourselves as a form of self-soothing because we feel empty. And that emptiness won't go away by overeating. It'll probably induce another state. But emotional regulation is a very big part of thinking about how we talk about food and having a good appetite, eating well for ourselves and for the planet. And this links, I think, dramatically to that emotional hole that some people feel that food is supposed to fill.
Absolutely, Barry. I think mindset is incredibly important. Yes. Would you like to share something?
Yeah, but when you started talking about hunger, I was also thinking about the practice of Ramadan, where you don't eat from early morning to late evening, and you break the fast, and you don't drink either. So it's very, you deprive yourself a lot, and I think those that do it, they see it as a ritual to commemorate the appreciation of the food. So maybe one of the biggest problems is the constant access to food when you are in a modernized urban world. That you are hardly hungry. You're hardly ever hungry if you just follow the whim of your first desires and then seek food when it's there. And I think it's a good idea to develop a hunger, to develop an empty stomach. And I know that the food industry did a lot of work in the 80s to break down the idea of snacking as not good for you, and that it was not good for you to be too hungry when you started eating, because you would overeat. Something like, also I've seen advertisements from the 60s and 70s where they would say, maybe the ice cream you have between lunch and dinner is the one that prevents you from overeating.
I've seen that one, yeah.
And they did a good job in making everyone afraid of hunger. I don't think we need to be afraid of hunger if we know there's food at some point. I mean, to have hunger where you don't know where your next meal is coming from.
It's a different story.
You don't see a timeline that leads to that meal. I mean, I can be on the train home and be very hungry and bike and everything and cook the food, but I know it'll be there, so it's okay. I'm not gonna starve to death. I don't have to eat a cake at the station for that to happen. I can appreciate my hunger.
Yeah, I really like that. It could be interpreted as this emptiness that you might want to fill emotionally by eating, or when you feel sad, like emotional eating. But that also a kind of void of eating is also creating space for something else. So it's really like a two-sided kind of idea. Perhaps here's the kohlrabi again.
That looks like a big challenge.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges with the kohlrabi, I know from a Nordic perspective, is that at a point in the First World War, there was so much hunger that people would start killing their husbandry, the animals on their farms, and eat the food, eat the feed, and kohlrabi was among them. So in certain historical context, you can see this as this is the taste of hunger. This
Poverty,
is the taste of poverty, and I'm sure if the Netherlands, you had this
tulip bulbs.
You had the winter between 1944 and 45, where the Germans that were occupying the country would prevent food from getting in. So the citizens of the big city were starving, very much indeed. And everything you associate with that is difficult to take up and to feel as pleasurable. And so we have to relearn kohlrabi. We have to relearn the foods that have been associated with poverty, with hunger, with stigma of this is not something that is desirable.
But doesn't it, in many of our discussions today, also this morning, many cases come down to that it's never just about the flavor, but it's really about the context and the story around it.
I think that's right. One of the things we didn't talk about is acquired tastes. So there are foods that you didn't like, and then you like them. And now the question is, do they taste different between when you now like them and when you didn't like them? Well, if they taste different, you haven't acquired that taste. It's just got a new taste for you. But if they taste the same, what is it that has changed your liking? And very often, it's a way of presenting them or thinking about them or associating them with other foods that makes that switch. And it's really interesting. I mean, I know that people try very crude things with children, that they will smother broccoli with tomato sauce to try to encourage children to eat broccoli. But I've seen very clever children suck all the tomato sauce off the broccoli and throw it away. You know, it's not as simple as that, but we should be more interested in how we acquire tastes.
But is there a physiological change behind that as well? If you start to accept a taste after a while?
No, I think it's psychological.
Yeah.
when I was young and foolish and playing rugby, I used to drink lager, which I thought was the only thing to drink, and I didn't want to drink bitter beer. And then one day I saw one of my teammates eating an apple and drinking a pint of bitter. And I, in my mind, immediately understood this connection between the bitterness of the apple core and the bitterness of the beer. And I thought, a pint of ale, an apple, how natural, how right. And I switched my preferences that day, and I just drank bitter beer, wouldn't drink lager. So something psychological.
Thanks for sharing that story.
I think it also has to do with removing the unfamiliarity. If you have foods that are too novel, we've shown, I mean, it's been shown it's been hypothesized for in industrial design that there's this balance between novelty and familiarity, and for food it's very prominent. And we've shown, for instance, with craft beer, that there's an optimal level of novelty that you have to have. So we appreciate familiarity a lot. We cannot get enough of familiarity. So the change that occurs after some time when you've been exposed to foods is the loss of the unfamiliarity. But I would say, don't go home and force feed your children, because it's not going to make them appreciate something after 8 times if you force feed them that. And I remember 6 years ago we did a mass experiment, and I was interviewed on TV, and one of the journalists, one of the staff reporters, she had forced her child over the weekend to eat cod roe, because that child didn't, and she had heard somewhere that if you try it 8 times, then it's enough. So she force-fed that child cod roe over the weekend, and of course that child didn't come to appreciate cod roe by the end of that weekend either, because it was way too often, it was forced, etc. So you have to say, well, if you want to, you have to go gentle if you want to persuade something to try something new. And it is better if they themselves are motivated to try something new. And we had the discussion in the online forum a lot, how can we make people who are neophobic inspire themselves to try new things. And that has to come from an inner drive.
Yes, and it has to come from a desire for exploration.
Yeah.
So the work we were hearing about that B. Wilson does with children as a sort of educating their interest in food, I think is so important. And nowadays, unlike my childhood, children are encouraged to play with their food before they eat it. And that's good, because their fingers are as sensitive as their lips, and they give them clues about the texture they will feel when it goes from fingers to mouth. And so they're able to anticipate for themselves what's about to happen, and it becomes less daunting. The worst thing is to imagine a child strapped in a chair, told to open its mouth, and a huge implement comes towards you and forces something into the mouth that you weren't expecting. You don't know what it will be like. What a terrible idea.
Absolutely. Any reflection on this image?
I think it's about connectivity to the place you are. And I like that.
I think it's about overeating.
Okay. Is it coming in or going out?
Is it in or out? Yeah. All right. Maybe here's one that's kind of referring to your story about eating with the hands, right?
Yeah.
Tongue is in your fingers. So we have...
It's so important. Touch. As soon as children do this naturally, they pick things up and put them in their mouths. So as soon as you touch something with the fingers, you are getting a clue about whether it's sticky or firm or maybe rough. And that's biasing sometimes what was in your mouth. So friend and colleague Charles Spence, who was at the last Creative Taste Buds, Charles will do experiments where people are asked to rub a piece of fabric that's either velvet or Velcro while they're tasting an ice cream or wine or some soup. And it can either taste more rough or more smooth depending on what your fingers are feeling.
Yeah.
So that shows you the way in which your expectations are biased by your first touch of food.
And could we use that kind of research to make things more sustainable? Because I can imagine that if you would make a packaging or a food experience with a specific kind of food, that these kind of external factors could really help you to kind of provide for this experience that you might want to have from a more unsustainable kind of food, right?
I do think so, but you don't want to increase packaging. We know that packaging is a big part of the driver in the food industry, and people will try very hard to give the feel of the packet some texture that will predict what people are having. When you get a smoothie in a carton in the supermarket, fruit smoothie, the carton is waxy and it has the sort of texture that the gooey fruit will have when it slips across the palate. So that's deliberately done, but it may not be a great idea to spend so much on the packaging.
All right.
Is the food smelly? Is that a fly?
It could be. I mean, it's
over the summer.
it's all in
I
your
read
mind,
this,
right?
Yeah,
You're the one
I read
who's
this
looking
book
at it.
called Flavor, where Rob Dunn, he makes an argument for that. Actually, we put deliciousness first instead of calories in many aspects, and he discusses fermentation in that context. And it's even demonstrated now that there are monkeys who can, or you can say, they do an uncontrolled fermentation. They take some particular fruits. The fruits are too hard for them to eat, so they throw them on the ground, and they come back 2 days later, and they pick them up and they smell them. And if the fermentation has gone well, the food has been broken down and made more delicious because the texture is approachable. So this is probably the piece of fruit that has been lying on the ground for 2 days and has fermented in the right way for the capuchin monkey to appreciate it.
And that's the monkey.
Yeah.
And the fruits that are fermented might even give you an alcoholic hit. So I mean, there are rotten grapes that you see animals pick up and eat and then stagger around, and that may be the way we discovered how to make wine from grapes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we have to develop foods for individual preferences.
Do you think so?
I think that would make it easier. I mean, it shouldn't be one size fits all. And I'm an advocate of diversity in many aspects, but in particular in food, and also that maybe it's a occupational hazard. I just want to try new foods. I don't know what came first, if I started out that way.
But I guess there are enough foods for you to try. You don't have to necessarily have food only like specifically made for you, right?
No, but I know that there would be some people who will have a problem with new food that would benefit if they know that they are being met in their problems, let's say appreciating particular textures, etc.
Would you have an example of that, perhaps?
Yes. A traditional Nordic or Swedish, Finnish fermented dairy product is called viili in Finnish and feel in Swedish, and it's a very long one. And it comes from the lactic acid bacteria that are doing the fermentation. They create very long strains of carbohydrates, polysaccharides that are outside, that are being expelled, and they make it slimy. So when you pour it, you can make a very long connected strand. And you can then look for bacteria that are not creating as long strands, and you can decrease the sliminess of that type of food. So you have long feel, the traditional Swedish long feel, that is not as slimy, but still has some of the aspects of being you can pour it and make a long strain, but without feeling the sliminess.
The first step easier into that.
So because that food is a traditional food and it's losing its significance in Sweden and Finland because it's too slimy. So if you can keep it up by developing new strains, finding new strains that will decrease the sliminess but still maintaining some of the other properties.
We also have, there's lots of individual preference, and we know we have them, and that we have tremendous individual differences. But let's not forget the huge celebration of eating together, where we share the pleasure of food, or where you make food for other people, and they are genuinely appreciative and not just polite. So I think the miracle is sometimes finding the foods that we can settle on and agree among maybe a limited circle, but I prefer that to just trying to fix foods for every individual.
Yeah. We have a few more minutes, I believe. Does anybody have questions for these two? Or would like to add something to this conversation? Yes?
Can we get a microphone? I think we're just getting a microphone. So Barry can hear you.
Just.
Yes. I just had the thought in a saying I was told a few years ago about hunger, and hunger is your friend, because hunger lets you allow the pleasure of eating, which you couldn't be pleasant about if you weren't hungry. So hunger is your friend.
Mm.
I think it wasn't really a question, right? You would like to share the insight. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
So mine is also about hunger, because this conversation around hunger has left me really sad, that I feel like there is a huge perspective that we're missing in this conversation around why are we even talking about sustainability. And from my perspective, it's the hundreds of millions of people who do not have the pleasure of the beauty of hunger. And I feel it's a very elitist and a very sort of coming from a huge place of privilege. And my driver for changing my life has been the absolute sadness of having witnessed dying children in refugee camps. And within a decade or two, we're going to have so many people experience this. So I feel like there is a driver of this understanding this pain that needs to be addressed as well.
Do you have examples of how we could carry that in a better way?
Well, I feel like we need to feel the pain. Like for me, there is such a denial and a sense of defeat in the distance that we have from nature and not understanding the privileged situation that we're in, but actually feeling the climate change and the fact that we are climate change. For me is a gateway, and allowing for that pain to sit with it is, for me, very, very important way through to also wanting to act. And I'm not saying this to put shame into the room, but I think that emotional aspect can, or at least has been for me, a huge driver. And I feel like that actually the dining table can be a beautiful way of addressing this and having this conversation in a meaningful way.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to share something or ask something? And if not, then I think we're at the end of this session. So thank you very much, Bom, Barry. And
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Comments.
Thank you very much. I have to say it's wonderful. Thank you very much, Barry, and thank you very much, Bom, and thank you particularly, Mariah, because it's wonderful to see you in your element. Because it was clear that one of the interesting things about this whole framing of this thing is very much about the curation of eating, and it was very enjoyable to watch you curate these two gentlemen and to see them kind of almost eating out of your hand, which was lovely because of the way in which you presented these images and the way in which we enjoyed watching them. And there was something on a sort of meta level that I thought was just working so beautifully. So thank you very much for that. Now, I have to say something. I have to say that don't forget, for those people physically here, you will be meeting tonight at 6 o'clock down in the brewery area, because we're going to go after something to eat. I hope those at home have something nice to eat tonight as well. The issue that was raised a second ago there very much is going to be picked up tomorrow, I believe, in the session. So that's kind of almost a nice segue. It's almost as if we planted the thought in your head, but I know it's there. So that's going to be something that's going to bleed rather nicely into tomorrow's session, I do believe. Don't forget, tomorrow we start at 10 o'clock to start at 10:30. I believe the virtual audience will be coming online at 10:30, but you are welcome to come and join us at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I think that is about it. You've got a lot to think about. One of the things I said this morning was I asked you all about your different tribes. And one of the things I think is really quite fascinating is when you hear all this wonderful stuff, you heard the stuff from this morning, you heard the stuff from this afternoon, is what are you doing? What are you thinking about? Are you thinking about this on a very general level? Have you kind of detached yourselves from your day jobs and just going, oh, this is great, you know? Or are you constantly in a state of anxiety and thinking, holy crap, what am I going to do? How am I going to bring all this stuff into my day job? So that's something that you don't have to answer now, but it's something that I certainly want to have keeping you awake tonight so that tomorrow you can continue with this thought about what does this all mean for your tribal affairs, and what does this all mean from a holistic point of view? How are we going to solve this? Because as I said this morning, we're going to have some wonderful speakers. We've had some wonderful speakers. We can listen to what they're saying, but what does it ultimately mean, and how are we going to make sense of it? And how are we going to answer that question about being able to eat for pleasure and for the planet? So big round of applause to them, to you, and to all the organisers, to all the tech people. Don't forget to come back at 6 o'clock, and don't forget to come back tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your audience.